The following video is a commentary on a work that was created in 1969 called TM31210, a 256-page Army technical manual called Improvised Munition Handbook. Section 3 specifically is what I'm going to be discussing in the video because we don't have a lot of time. It's on weapons in general and other things, and small arms and ammunition, on what you can most easily scavenge, loot, and get. And what you end up with is usually smoothbore, not obturating because it's overbore, meaning it will not allow whatever you're firing to engage the walls of the inside of what you're firing it through. And keeping in mind that 0.47, 0.22, and 0.72 inner diameter pipe or tubing is effectively non-existent. You can't use those at all unless you're willing to find something smaller and make it bigger by drilling and then sanding, and maybe even using 80 grit sandpaper to rifle it, or using something larger and have it be not obturating, which means it wastes a lot of propellant, it comes out slower, the bullet effectively has to travel between the sides of the barrel, riding on a shock wave and air pressure that's blowing past it, along with a bunch of other crap, or other. Now, it has 11 sections of it, 10 of which I'm going to bring up really quickly. The 11th one is on making silencers. The narrow use case for this work has nothing to do with whatever you might have looked up to find my video. Nothing to do with it. The narrow use case this has exclusively is to make a crappy weapon or a piece of equipment or gun to get something better. The whole book is about this. That and harassing your opponent in the context of a war. During war, any laws you might want to cite below in the comment section don't apply. The rules of war exclude local laws from being applied because by definition, but you can't do that in a war. So here we go. The first one I'm bringing up, not in the order they're presented, is making repriming material to reprime cartridges you have so you can also reload them. And also making priming material for making things that have nothing to do with a cartridge-based gun. The first one is using match tip material and or toy caps, as mentioned offhandedly, to make a primer. There are several editions of this that were released, quote-unquote. There's only one real one, and it doesn't mention the toy caps, at least at this point. This is an extremely dangerous activity. Do not do this. If you are in an environment where you have the ability at all to get primers instead of any kind, do that instead, because dealing with the chemical compound itself is extremely hazardous for reasons that I won't even go into, but it's more than what you think. The next one is match head propellant. This one is, again, don't do this unless you have to. Obviously, if you're in a war environment, you can find shotgun shells. Use the lower burn rate propellant out of a shotgun shell before you do this, etc. But don't do this either. But this is slightly less Darwin Award winning. Okay? And before we go any further, none of this information was meant or intended in any way to Darwin Award people, unlike the Anarchist Cookbook, which it seems to have been designed to get people hurt. I mean, it's worthless almost. Just barely useful in 2 ways, or 3. Next one out of this, after making your primer material and after you're making your propellant, is making projectiles. They only talk about using bolts. Literally taking a hacksaw out, making steel bolts into bullets. Okay? That's how far gone we are here. Now let's go on to the next one. Muzzle loader. Coincidentally, this is the first example I'm going to bring up in here of something that is viable. This one uses a 3/8 inch Schedule 40 or standard, STD is actually how they spell it sometimes, pipe. It's easier to find pipe that's Schedule 40 than the other schedules like 80, 160, whatever, or strong, extra strong, and whatever else they call them. And in this case, this one happens to have an inner diameter that's almost exactly 50 caliber. If you're to remove the seam that's almost always in there, and then sand it, especially if you sanded it by rotating your sandpaper, you would in effect make a somewhat decent rifle barrel for 50 cal. And using as a muzzle loader and using match head propellant and primers, yeah, that's actually doable. It's at that point where it's viable. I'm not saying it's a good idea. I'm just saying it's somewhat sketchy at that point. Again, the entire work, all 250 some odd pages, has lots of disclaimers and warnings in it. You have to read the warnings all in once. They're not printed in front of each heading. You have to read the whole dang book to get them all. Follow all of them. Or don't do this at all, is which I'm recommending. The next one I'm going to bring up is a 22 caliber firearm. Now again, in most of these cases, again, the barrel diameter is normally bigger than what you're firing. It's normally smaller than the cartridge, so they end up having to drill them. Sometimes they make it to where you just shove the cartridge in and it goes through, and it's obviously too big because the cartridge diameter or chamber diameter is supposed to be, in most cases, bigger than the bore diameter or bullet diameter. And if you make it chamber diameter, yeah, it'll fire. It'll be easy. You won't have to do any real work with it. And it will work. It just won't work as effectively. But here we go. This is only designed, again, to get something. You're shooting at a shorter range trying to get a weapon from someone else. Okay? But unlike the muzzle loader here, where literally you could just make your own bullets for it to be perfect obturation, to almost be a perfectly viable gun, we are now at 22 caliber. Now, of course, you might be assuming, okay, we have to use an overbore. This is one exception of the bunch where it's a 21 caliber piece of tubing. It's a Schedule 80, not Schedule 40. They pick on this one specifically. Schedule 80 1/8 inch pipe. Because that one, even though it's smaller, it's not much of a difference to make a difference with lead bullets going through. It will actually work enough. And the advantages outweigh the risks, which are very micro. They're virtually none. One of the weird things about if you fired a smaller bullet through a bigger barrel, obviously the accuracy and pressure and speed are all screwed up, but it becomes less dangerous to you. This one, while it has an elevated level of danger to you, you're firing a cartridge that's normally very anemic, so suddenly it's kind of a wash? I guess that's the assumption. And at the time when they tested it, the rumor has it, it's not confirmable, that at 50 feet away from the shooter, they put up an 18-inch by 18-inch round target and got target hit in the middle. More than 80% of the time, they hit in the 50 percentile mark in here. So that's what they based it on. Let's move on. Now we get the 7.62. Instead of it being, somehow some sort of rimfire looking thing, this is actually using a legit rifle cartridge. Now in this case, they use a cartridge that is going to be firing down through a barrel that's too big. But to accommodate for the cartridge that suddenly gets much bigger, they use a pipe adapter and then a bigger piece of pipe and then put the parts together. Well, this seems very clever. Another method would be to just drill into the same hunk of pipe you started off with and just make it to where it really chambers it correctly, because there's a drill bit that's a very near perfect shot for that. Data below in the description. So that seems a little hinky. And then right after that, we have the 9mm. It's using the same hunk of pipe, and they just chamber it by drilling it for the 9mm. And 357 could also be chambered that way. And you can find people doing that in reality, making these sort of things. They just make them a long barrel so you can try to get some advantage out of the long barrel, getting a little more speed and a little more accuracy and making it heavier so it doesn't jump as much. Then we get the 38 caliber pistol that's using the same hunk of tubing, same pipe. So we go from 7.62 millimeter to 9 millimeter to over that to like 8 millimeter, all in the same hunk of tubing. And even though it says 38, it's not 0.38 inches. It's actually smaller than that. Next, we get the 45 caliber that's using the same pipe we were going to use for the 50 cal barrel. It's 0.49, so we are basically using a 49 caliber barrel for a 45 caliber bullet. Again, there is a 4.6 someplace, but again, it's based on what can you easily find. So that'd be Schedule 40. But they did break that rule by doing Schedule 80 for firing 22 cal. And again, I should point out here, even though it's a bad idea to do it, obviously, because we're dealing with more propellant, using 5.56 or 223 cartridges by just drilling a chamber for it, which is really hard to do, by the way. You could get away with making that barrel, again, that's underbore, work for that at all better. So I kind of wonder about these things. And then we get to the 12 gauge, which it's a wash. You're putting a 0.8 inch cartridge into a 0.81 inch cartridge chamber diameter into a .824 inner diameter pipe, firing it downrange, when you could break your Schedule 40 rule, get a Schedule 80 pipe that's smaller diameter. It's not an 82 cal, it's a 74 caliber-ish, which is better because 12 gauge is supposed to be 73. And you chamber it using a 13/16 drill bit, and you're just fine. Well, it's based on what was available and what they could easily find at the local hardware store near an Army base to do this. This is near an area where you would assume the Army would cause a lot of companies to provide a plethora of extra stuff they may not be able to sell to anybody other than an Army. An Army uses all sorts of crazy amounts of lots of stuff, not just Schedule 40, standard, whatever. They'll use whatever they get their hands on to make things. So I'm presuming they had access to all of these, but decided that's not likely to be found in Southeast Asia or Europe as easily. So this is the end of the review of this. To summarize, being able to make a muzzle loader out of nearly an ideal hookup pipe, make your own priming and propelling material. They even give decent discussions on using a wick. Using this to be able to stock up on someone and take away everything, including their weapons. Or even just scaring the hell out of them so they drop something because you're desperate to get ammo and weapons or just food. The narrow use case we're discussing here, yeah, that's doable. Especially if you combine all those together, just do the muzzle loader. Being able to do the 22 caliber, even though it's underbore and you'd be obliged to sand it, would end up being damn near a normal barrel in a gun. The others, however, are overbore, inappropriate, less likely to work, shorter range, lower velocity, more scatter factors, shorter range, like 50 feet, and the bullet would drop in a shorter range, and are not ideal but perfectly appropriate because, again, if it's riding on the shockwave going down through the barrel, coming out at a lower speed, wasting propellant, only being able to work maybe 50 or 100 feet away, and dropping immediately, you're not going to hit somebody downrange by accident as easily, like maybe one of your buddies. You're more likely to have, if it has a spread to it, it'll hit somewhere in that area. Again, they tested it within a certain range. Again, that's a rumor, I can't confirm it. And it would be grab the hunk of pipe you find that'll fit the cartridge. For all the pistol cartridges and shotgun shells, they'll have straight walls. It's fine. It'll work-ish. And if possible, get the one that's a little smaller and drill it, because you got a hold of a drill just long enough to do it. Any damn drill could do this. Yeah. And by not looking or fixating on finding the ideal Schedule 80 pipe, you'd be able to build it rapidly. And also, in a junk pile, this is the pipe diameters you find. I mean, let's list them. 3/8 inch, 1/8 inch, 1/4 inch, 3/4. Those are the most common ones purchased and used for almost every project. Some of these would be found in lamps. Literally, just a lamp, tear it apart and make a rifle out of it. Some of the stuff, while clever and interesting, and it's still hinky. You'd need to shim most of the chambers so you could reuse the cartridges, which if you're looking to make your own primers and match head propellant or breaking down and just building a muzzleloader, you probably are at the point where you should be reloading your cartridges. And they talk about reloading it with bolts. Literally nuts, bolts, screws method here. Okay. So my evaluation of it. Down below in the description will be comparisons directly with pipe and cartridge and chamber and stuff like that. Conclusion. Is any of this useful to a civilian? The answer is yes, as a coffee table book or something interesting to put on your shelf for entertainment value. In a world where you can go buy primers, propellant, and cartridges and buy a real barrel off of everything but Amazon, I mean, eBay and everywhere else, really cheap, like $10, no, this isn't useful. If there was a shit hit the fan scenario, most of you don't need this because you don't, and you wouldn't be able to find these things. Would this be useful to the people it was given to? Marginally. Was this designed to be a booby trap for people trying to do this as some sort of sick joke done by the military? My evaluation is no. If you read all of the instructions and read every single warning and disclaimer, is this dangerous? I'm saying mostly safe. Mostly harmless. Thanks for watching. Have a good day. Good luck with that. This has been a review of the Technical Manual from the Army, 31-210.